and welcome back to the How the Race Was Won podcast. I'm Dane Cash, and I am here with bike racing analyst extraordinaire, Cosmo Catalano. Cosmo, let's talk Olympics. What do you think of that?
I almost want to call them the World Championships. I almost want to call them like Perry. I don't know, what part of the countryside did they go through? Perry. It was very... I don't want to acknowledge that these were the Olympic Games because the racing was so good.
Yes, in contrast to, I know how you sometimes feel about the Olympic Games, it was quite a weekend of Olympic road racing, both on the men's and the women's side. That's what we're going to focus on in this week's show. We're going to talk about all the action across the road races. Obviously, there are other events going on in the cycling world. There are mountain bike events. There's track events.
70,000 track events, I believe.
Yeah, roughly, approximately. Obviously, there's other sports entirely as well.
Trying to keep up with swimming.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about road races, and though they were some great races, honestly, I felt like it was just sort of a sensation of, I'm using that word because it's a funny thing that people say in the cycling world, of, oh, wow, this is what one-day racing is like. That's right. It's great. Because, Grand Tour season, quote unquote, we've been in the throes of it for a little while now, and there's just not always stuff to talk about. And to be fair, there were only so many tactics to talk about in certain one-day races this year. But the Olympic road races had the tactics, they had the thrills and excitement, and it was just, a blast. And that's what we're going to talk about on the show today. We'll also look a little bit ahead to what's coming up. Cosmo, what is your headline for the men's road race at the Paris Olympics?
I would say Champs-Élysées futures plummet sharply. I think there were a lot of people on both the men's and the women's races commenting like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if there were a race like this in Paris every year? And there is a race that famously goes through Paris every year. It's just not a very interesting one.
The general context here, I think, is that you are saying, hey, Tour de France, why do you do this sprint stage when you could go up a hill?
Let's back up. I'm just saying, I'm not saying get rid of the last stage of the Tour de France and do this, but I am saying that there is a last stage of the Tour de France that generally falls on the Champs-Élysées. Generally isn't that interesting except for the sprint at the end. And we just saw a really good race through the streets of Paris, through maybe not as famous a place as the Champs-Élysées, but through a very famous, very Parisian place. Like Montmartre played a big role.
Yeah, I mean, Sacré-Cœur, like that it was pretty iconic.
It was really cool, and it was really good racing. That's maybe not necessarily what you want at the end of a 3-week stage race, but people want to see this race on a regular basis, I feel like. And maybe some of that was just, as we'll talk about, how it played out. But at the same time, like, if I were in some sort of mythical cycling finale / race course futures market, I would be concerned about the value of my Champs-Élysées holdings after this.
Do you want to tell us maybe how this race was won?
I could. I may complain slightly that we saw all of a race that was very, very long and it was not very interesting for a lot of it. That's cool to see sometimes, but it's also maybe a little bit excessive, especially when you've got teams of no more than 4 contesting it. But I'll give some shout outs to Ryan Mullen and Elliot Viviani for getting in the break almost from the beginning. I shouldn't even say almost from the beginning, 70K in. I also, Tish Minot, he was kind of the first person to come and start doing some chasing around 175K to go and was still at the front 100K later. There's a lot to encapsulate. Basically, around 92K to go, Madouas was one of the first, Valentin Madouas of Team France was one of the first people to kick off the major attacking from the contenders. We saw Lutsenko and Ben Healy from Ireland kind of build off of that. And they'd eventually join up with Ryan Mullen at the front of the field. That happened around 76K to go. And it was very active at the front around 73K to go. You saw even Remco Evenepoel himself from Team Belgium really trying to put just shake things up, get the field moving, get attackers going. He did it once through a feed zone, much to the chagrin of pretty much everyone else. Did split up the field, but it didn't stick. And kind of around this like low 70s, early 60s K to go. You saw kind of lesser known names, Domin Novak, Vacek, Lawrence Pithy, taking these attacks. And eventually you got kind of a solid group of second tier guys in with Niels Paulett, Madouas, Fred Wright. You had Canadian guy, Woods in there. A strong group of riders, but no one from the Netherlands, no one from Belgium, no one from Denmark. And those were the three big teams.
And we should say those are the three favorites coming in, the three favorite teams.
Big teams, as in they had 4 riders.
So, and good ones.
Yeah, no, very good riders.
Yeah.
But I mean, just in terms of like, if you haven't watched the Olympics before and you've just only seen pro racing, which is the opposite of how things are demographically, you might expect that a big team would have like a train of 5 riders in the front, when in fact you rarely saw more than one person from the same team in the same camera shot prior to this point in the race.
Right. I mean, and to those who didn't know, I mean, the four riders is the maximum. Very few teams even had that. You had a bunch of riders who had one, right? Like Biniam Girmay was the lone representative of Eritrea at the race, and there were several of those riders that they were the only ones representing their countries. They didn't exactly have teammates to put the work in to help them.
Yeah. So we had this group of 7 lesser known or second tier favorites kind of get established, and then Tish Benoot still 46K in, so he's been on the front working for a very long time. Leads into Montmartre, and then we had a huge kind of simultaneously. We had Ben Healy distancing Lutsenko from the very front of the race, so he is now solo. And then you had a huge attack from Mathieu van der Poel, as only Mathieu van der Poel can do. He is marked aggressively by Wout van Aert, who does not do anything, who is just there to sit behind him and kind of demotivate him. You had a little bit of counterattacking coming afterwards with Alaphilippe and with Matteo Jorgensen. Skoinch was there as well. They got together, they got a gap around 58 seconds at one point, but they didn't really congeal as a group. And some of the favorites who'd missed that, Mess Pedersen and Tom Pidcock, were making attacks, kind of trying to get the rest of the group back up. And you could sort of see them come into the back of the camera frame right as this Mathieu van der Poel group was kind of spreading across the road, sitting up. And then we got Remco Evenepoel attacking that immediately. And I mean, super convincing, incredibly compelling shot from the camera. And if the lack of radios, because there aren't radios at the Olympic Games race, if those played a role, I think it was right here. Because that attack, I think every single person who came into this with some knowledge of cycling would have known that this was a world-smashing attack. And what we got was a delay of maybe 5-10 seconds, and then Dylan van Barle, one rider from the Netherlands, on the front responding. And this is a situation where everybody's on the radio screaming their lungs out, like, get forward, get on his wheel, do something, this is a crazy attack.
This is the move.
Yeah, this is the move. And I mean, he bridged up within a kilometer to this Haller group, the second tier favorites group. They caught Healy around 30K to go. And then 28.5K to go, Remco attacked through the feed zone at the bottom of Montmartre, and very intentionally. It wasn't just it's a feed zone and he went hard. He rode on the feeding side of the road for as long as he possibly could, and then darted off to the left right as he came up to the place where the Soigneurs had bottles out. Very clearly, trying to make it hard to chase him, trying to get people to have to slam on the brakes to not hit a Soigneur. And I mean, racing, it was, I don't want to make it seem like Remco is bad, but I do want to just show the totality of his commitment to these attacks. He is not testing the waters. He is trying to, blow the legs off everyone behind him.
Right.
And so
he did.
He did. The only person who can follow this move is Valentin Madouas. Ben Healy comes staggeringly close, which is amazing considering he has been at the front of the race since 90K to go.
Yes.
So huge props for the way he took this thing on. But yeah, it's Madouas and Remco up the road. We come back around and there's a 48-second gap back to the main group, and we had Mathieu van der Poel and doing his big attack again, except less convincingly, because he's maybe a little tired. Everyone else is already kind of expecting it. Kind of a bit of full of Sound of Fury signifying nothing vibe, especially because of what happened afterward. We had Christophe Laporte countering and Matteo Jorgensen going with him. I
mean, as you reference this, are you aware of the name of the winner of the women's race? I mean, it's just so beautiful what you just said.
Well, okay, I am.
I mean, aware. I know that Shakespeare is the original.
Yes, he's.
Yeah.
And Faulkner was referencing Shakespeare. Okay.
Yes, I know.
Okay, I hadn't considered that connection, but you know what? I'm glad that you brought it up. That makes me
Southern
happy.
Gothic literature aside. Okay, so Remco Evenepoel drops Madouas on a climb and solos to victory, and he has no problems in between.
No, everything goes perfectly,
and the finish line. Everything goes great, right?
Just super smooth. Except that's not what happened at all. Remco was between a riding off of the wheel and attacking. He he was seeing Madwall behind him in a bigger gear, standing out of the saddle, making funny faces, and he kind of like rode harder and harder until he got the gap, and once he got the gap, then he attacked. I mean, they actually cut back. They weren't entirely sure he was attacking as they cut back to the main peloton for a second before they cut back to Remco opening the race running gap. And Remco is, I mean, he's gone, right? And so he's riding around. What are we, 4K to go? Suddenly, we cut back to Remco, and he's throwing his bike into the barriers, and he's slamming his fists together, or he's slamming his hands together, and he's waving and gesticulating, and like, again, like it very like this is the chaos you get with no radio racing, right?
Right.
I don't necessarily think that's good, but you don't get scenes like this on the radio where they're like, "Calm down, Remco. We're right here. You still have."
And especially because it was clear when he got back on the bike that he didn't have an exact sense of what the gap was.
No, I mean, he had an amazing change. I think he had an incredible change. You don't quite see the car come up. You don't see the mechanic get off, but he's like screaming like something is going wrong, and then 3 seconds later there's a mechanic with a bike who gives him God's own shove back up to pace, like just perfect, beautiful, almost gets hit by the camera bike as he pulls off from the throw. But Remco, he's back on the bike, he's geared up, he's spinning, and now he's frantically gesturing at his wrist, like, what's my time, guy, what's going on, what's going on? It's like very just moments of sheer panic that you would not get in radio supported racing.
Right. And in fact, he still had ample time.
Yeah. It was never. Yeah. It was. I mean, he could have casually put the bike down. He could have gotten a wheel change if it was a flat. Right. I think it was a front flat. I don't know, but like there was a whole lot of stuff that could have gone way worse than it did, and just kind of seeing the panic that overtook him. It wasn't quite panic. It was really just like he wanted his neutral support to come with the same intensity that he was putting into the pedals.
Right. Yes.
And it was really cool to see that, because you don't quite always see that when there are radios. That said, I don't think it had a huge factor into the tactics. But yeah, Remco comes in solos. Beautiful finishing shot on the wrong bicycle. Sorry, Specialized. You can Photoshop the right one in later.
I just want to point this out. I mean, we talked about this a little bit on Slack, but I feel like Specialized is still going to be pretty happy.
Yeah, it was very gorgeous. Remco kind of slowed to a stop, got off the line, planted the bike in front of him, threw his arms up, Eiffel Tower behind him, just mwah. Everything.
I mean, there's going to be cardboard cutouts of this. Like in every Specialized.
It's so good.
America, right?
You couldn't have choreographed it better.
Yeah.
But behind him, things got very interesting, because you still had Madwall in the gap, and then you had Laporte in the group behind him, trying to not, get the group broken up, because he knows he can win a sprint from this group, but also trying not to chase down his teammate. So very kind of cagey, edgy tactical situation for him to be in, compounded by the fact that this didn't quite come in clearly watching live, but that group, that third place group behind Madwall, got caught by another group just outside of 2K to go that contained Julian Alaphilippe. So it was a wild kind of finish that we didn't quite get all of, because we only see what goes through the broadcast, even though there was a camera guy there filming the entire breakdown of the lead into this sprint for third behind Madwall and Evenepoel. We don't actually know what happened, but it looked at one point like Alaphilippe basically led out by attack, kind of at a K&a-half to go. Because when Laporte came around the corner, he was already in the front. He was already up to speed. Won the sprint pretty convincingly, and ahead of Attila Valter, who celebrated like he maybe didn't know that Madwall was still in the gap between Evenepoel and the group. But I mean, fourth place at this race.
Fourth place is great, but it's not a medal.
Yeah, on Team Hungary, by the way, which is not a world powerhouse. It also did pretty well in the women's race, by the way.
Yeah.
It's still worth celebrating, but I think he did a like kind of fist bump in the air, like, yeah, I got that medal. And it's sort of like, no, did not get that medal.
Yeah. And fifth, Tom Squinch, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, also very good. Team Latvian, solo Team Latvian.
Yes, indeed. He was one of those riders who was just riding by himself, not, didn't have other teammates to chase things down. So in the end, Remco becomes the first ever to win the men's road and TT titles. He did it in a way that was, like you said, I mean, the photos at the end were just amazing and a statement. And I think, there's a lot of things to talk about here, but let's talk tactics first, because coming into the race, it seemed like, and this was the headline of the preview that we had at escapecollective.com, Belgium versus Mathieu van der Poel. And it really felt like that on the day.
Interesting.
Because Belgium, as a team, was a very well-oiled machine. And that, to me, it's worth pointing out because it hasn't always gone that way for Belgium. I mean, Belgium goes into every big one-day race, with stars, with riders who could win. And Belgium goes into basically every world championships with that. And in this case, they went in with two potential winners in Van Aert and Evenepoel. And they've done that before. And it hasn't always worked out. But it sure has worked out the last couple of times they've done it, having these two riders on the same team. And I think it worked out really perfectly on Saturday when Mathieu Van Der Poel going into the race. I mean, I'm assuming that Belgium, the director, is drawing this up and saying, Van Aert, your job is to follow every single thing that Mathieu Van Der Poel does, and then potentially beat him in a sprint. I think that's the objective of Van Aert. And if you're Van Der Poel, I think you know that Remco Evenepoel is going to attack at some point. And you also know that the rest of Belgium is going to try to chase you down whenever you go. So I thought it was a pretty good idea for Van Der Poel to go when he went. It was a little early, but I also don't know that he would have gotten away if he'd gone later, because I think he wanted to anticipate Evenepoel. We saw this throughout the spring. It was a spring of riders attacking from farther out than we thought was reasonable over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, this felt like a much more normal one-day race than we've seen all year. Normal in quotation marks. Despite the no radios, despite the small teams, despite the national teams, despite everything, this played out with that sort of choreography. I think at one point the break had like 15 minutes. Like, it was very, what I will say is I think Van Der Poel being that guy who wants to throw these massive, massive attacks, really kind of opened him up to counterpunching. I think you saw Remco at the front before you saw Van Der Poel, but he wasn't really trying to knock everybody out, right? He was trying to get the front of the race active and shaken up, get opportunities for Jasper Stuyven, or probably not Van Aert, because like you said, I think his mission was disarm Van Der Poel. To shake things up, to break up the race and let other teams do work so everyone's not staring back at Belgium and wondering why they're not chasing. And he was extremely smart when he made his winning attack, because every other major rider in the race had just done something, right? You had that Van Der Poel attack, you had Van Aert marking him, you had a group kind of with them with Alaphilippe and Jorgensen, and then you had the group of people who were either trying to catch back up or trying to counter that with Pidcock and with Pedersen. And so every other contender had just put in a little bit of work in their legs, and everyone is sort of regrouping and looking around. And that's when he hit, and he hit so hard. The chopper shot, this is like Fabian Cancellara, super secret bike motor controversy gap opening. It was just full bore. And the fact that no one was ready to snap to attention to chase that tells me that everybody had just, kind of punched themselves out of it. Just they needed a few more minutes to recover, and he timed it perfectly.
And probably most importantly, the one rider who I think is probably the best in the world at short power efforts had just made an attack. And whether, I don't know that it was, I would love to know whether it was some DS with the Belgian team or Remco riding on instinct to just go as soon as the Van Der Poel attack was brought back. Because that's what he did. And it was just so perfect. And the interesting thing is, Evenepoel, he needs to ride in a tactically sound way to be able to use his big engine, because he doesn't have the sprint. And if he pulls anyone along with him, then it's a risk that he doesn't win. And this was the perfect time to go solo.
Yep. And I think it's important to note that he didn't, he let other people close that gap down, to Van Der Poel. He wasn't necessarily countering Van Der Poel so much as letting the race come back to Van Der Poel, letting even more people do even more work, and then playing. And
then, counter punching.
Yep.
Yeah. And then over the ensuing kilometers, I think that a couple of things happened that are worth highlighting. So first of all, Van Aert continued to just be on Van Der Poel duty, and it was impressive, and it was exactly what the team needed, the Belgian team needed. And again, I feel like this has not always happened for the Belgian team. They've sometimes had, and it's not just these two riders, right? It's not just Van Aert and Remco. It's they've had a long history of having multiple riders who are really good, potentially capable of winning. They were the Van Avermaet Gilbert years. I mean, this is a country that has a surplus of good riders who have somehow managed to not always win when they were expected to. I mean, to be fair, Van Avermaet did win a gold medal at the Olympics, but there were world championships in which they were favored and they did not come away with it.
I mean, they rode for the same team for a while, and still, it's a professional team, and still couldn't get it together. So.
Right. And yet, here at this Olympic Games, we saw how these two riders can work together so well, and we saw what it can do. We saw that. Yeah, the funny thing is that Evenepoel is the best. I think he's the best in the world at soloing. I mean, I think if you win a gold medal in the time trial, that kind of proves that, right? I guess it proves that you're the best at soloing on aero bars, but in general, you have to have a big engine to do that. And yet, because bike racing is, more than just an exercise contest, which we'll get to, especially when talking about the women's race, because it's more than that, you need to have your policemen behind you chasing down any time Van der Poel attempts to close the gap. Yeah, so Van der Poel behind was being policed by Van Aert. And then the other big thing to me that stood out, and I sort of have something kind of funny happened where I'm watching the race, and with about 5K to go, I'm watching Evenepoel just going all out every corner. And he's already got a minute. And I'm thinking, you could probably take it easy. Like, don't risk crashing, And I actually texted my dad. We're both watching the race together. And I said, he could probably go a little easier here. And like literally within moments of that, he punctured. And it was, that's why you don't go easy.
Yep.
Just in case this happens.
Just in case.
You want to build that gap. And yeah, it is a little risky to take the corners as hot as he's taking them. But in case you puncture, well, then you've built up your huge gap, which he had. And it was because he just, once he put in his massive attack, which you pointed out, he did not let up. He did not take his foot off the gas or his foot off the, I don't know, choose your analogy or your figurative language here. But he just kept going so hard that when would-be disaster struck, it really wasn't that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. I mean, that and the fact that he had a good mechanic.
He made it seem like a much bigger deal than it was.
He did. And I think that's largely because he probably was uncertain of how close behind Madouas was.
I mean, when you get in your head, at least again, with my low-level Cat 3 racing, you just want, when you're going and it's going well and you're putting out power, you just want to go. You don't want to think about anything else. And you kind of tell yourself in the back of your head, they're going to catch you. Just keep powering. They're going to catch you. Keep powering, Like, you just have to have that, like, it's like that Mario Kart Ghost, right? You're racing against Mario, your best time, and you're ahead of it. You got to just keep imagining it's right there. And that, I think that's part of why he was so frenzied when he got off the bike, that's the mind state he's in.
I mean, we'll talk about this in a bit, but I think Kristen Faulkner was in the same state of mind, because when she was pulling down that finishing straight, it was like, you've got it. You can celebrate.
But in rowing, you can't see the finish line until you're already past it because you're looking the other way. So I think
that's a good point.
I was going to shout out Wout van Aert. A lot of people kind of talk about this like Wout van Aert rivalry with Van der Poel being like lopsided or overblown. And I want to point out that Wout van Aert has done an outstanding job of being a great teammate, remarkably great teammate in at least two major situations. 2022 Tour de France, just incredible. Probably could have won a lot more stages, but really seemed focused on doing whatever he could for Jonas Vingegaard. And then, today, or this Olympics, like he clearly showed in the time trial that he was a top contender. He did not beat Evenepoel, right? But still, like, he is arguably the better one-day racer, certainly the more Palmares storied, celebrated one-day racer.
And for a flatter course, he's
and
because he could sprint in a way that Evenepoel just can't. Yeah. And
instead, it was very clearly on the defang Van der Poel plan, which he did perfectly. So yeah, I think more respect maybe for the non-wins of Wout van Aert.
Yeah, sure. That's a good point. To be fair to Van der Poel, he has been a great teammate to Philipsen on occasion as well. Mm-hmm. Well, Milan-San Remo. But yeah, this was an instance of Van Aert doing great work. Van der Poel, like you said, I can understand why he attacked when he did. But you also point out he was opening himself up to that counter. Mm-hmm. And Evenepoel comes away with a pretty dominant showing, 2 gold medals, history making. And meanwhile, I was also very happy to see that France took 2 medals in the race, because they haven't done a whole lot on the Tour front. So at least when the Olympics are in Paris, they get to get some medals. And also, I was really happy to see those two in particular, those two riders, because Medwa has been just really visible a lot this year without actually getting too many wins. We've just seen him a lot. We've seen him quite frequently. He's been at the head of the race and then kind of eventually he's faded. He was up there in the Ardennes a couple times. And Christophe Laporte had a really rough spring. He was sick, I think, and missed out on his big goals. And, that made it so that Visma really struggled. Well, the fact that Wout van Aert wasn't there. So it was nice to see him bounce back because this race really suited him as well. And to see both of them up there was great. And then further down in the top 10, you got some, like you said, I mean, Attila Valter getting fourth is pretty awesome for Hungary. Tom Squinch getting fifth for Latvia. I mean, Marco Haller for Austria. There are riders, and Stefan Kung for Switzerland. There are riders who, representing nations that didn't have as much firepower, did a great job.
And I think a lot of that is the pull of three meaningful podium places, right? Like in Breaking the Chain, there's a whole shtick about how the worst thing you can do is get in the break and not win. And I think today we saw a bunch of riders who I could be reasonably certain that Remco Evenepoel was going to drop them at some point between the time they were pulling through and the finish line, and they almost all pulled through. And I think a lot of that is okay, Remco drops me, I'm still in the battle for silver, for bronze. And I don't think you see that in regular bike racing.
Silver at the Olympics versus second place on a tour stage. They're worlds apart.
They're one is good and one is, well, I don't want to say it's bad to finish second on a tour stage, but
it's just not it doesn't have
the tour. The normal cycling is much more in line with how the Greeks viewed in antiquity. The second place was viewed. Let me put it that way.
Except for the fact that in a normal cycling there are non-Greek riders. But yes, I think the Greeks would be appalled at all the non-Greek riders at the Olympics.
Well, they'd be confused, for sure.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Well, Remco Evenepoel, congratulations, first of all. Second of all, just this feels like the nth example of something we've talked about over and over and over and over again, which is that he is really good at what he is really good at. And even if he were not a Grand Tour contender, I think people would talk about him like one of the best riders in the world. And the fact that he is only means they just talk about things that he doesn't do. But he's now a world champion on the road, a Olympic champion on the road, a world champion at the time trial, and an Olympic champion at the time trial. He's also won a Grand Tour. He's also won multiple monuments. I mean, what more can you ask of Remco? It's just really impressive, and he's just, I think he deserves a lot of credit for doing all of this while being the most scrutinized rider. He's under the microscope because he is, Belgium's great, he's the marquee rider for Belgium in general, which is the most cycling obsessed country in the world. He is the marquee rider on Quickstep, whose boss has a history of putting a little pressure on his
being
riders.
Problematic.
Yeah. And he's just been, he's been in the spotlight since he was a teenager. And to be able to overcome, assumedly, a very stressful amount of pressure on two occasions now, time trial and road race, in the past week, after having podiumed at the Tour. Just, really impressive. Let's talk women's race. Abby, Mickey, and company over on Wheel Talk will do more breaking down, but I want to talk a little bit about it because, one, obviously I'm biased. The winner happens to have the same nationality as the both.
She's from Alaska, though.
But also, it was a heck of a race.
Alaska's awesome. I consider it part of the United States.
That's good because I think it is.
I would say maybe past his prologue, if we're going in the classical direction, semi-classical Elizabethan direction here. There was a lot. I think a lot of what happened in that finale was rooted in kind of what happened this spring, specifically between Lotte Kopecky and Marianne Vos. And I think Kristen Faulkner knows that because she's been racing with them all spring. She knows that she has the ability to kind of go away when other people aren't necessarily paying attention. And she used both of those things to the fullest of her ability in the finale here.
And she's also a smart person. So, like that, she knows it.
I
mean,
I was just stoked she made it down Montmartre with Kopecky. I was a little bit. I was like, oh man, please, goodbye handling.
That descent was
It's a serious
was
descent,
pretty wicked.
and people.
Yeah, and she had Kristen Faulkner in the past has. Yeah, there have been bike handling issues. Let's just say
I've been saying all year too that she got a lot better.
You have. Yeah,
she was right there with Kopecky, one of the best,
and it was true on. Yeah,
so
she I think played the chase really well when she and Kopecky were chasing. She was constantly letting Kopecky do a little more work.
I was surprised Kopecky didn't play more of I'm going to outsprint you, and I'm okay outsprinting you for third. I would love to sprint for gold, but that's what I would have done in Kopecky's shoes for sure. Because I think Faulkner was strong enough, certainly riding strong enough that day that like she could get up to the group and have just as much chance whether Kopecky was fresh or not, right? So
right, yeah, and then they got there, and to me it was really interesting. I mean, surely an attack was either going to come from Faulkner or Vash, right? Mm-hmm. Because those are the two riders who are less sprinty.
Although Vash is a pretty good sprinter, kind of pocket.
Sure,
pocket
but
sprinter.
Compared to Marianne Vos and a lot of Kopecky, I mean, yeah. And the attack came, and Vash herself tried to chase it down. And for a moment, I thought that she was going to because she was close. And then the elastic snapped, and then bam, it was over.
Ronan McLaughlin and I were maybe seeing this from opposite sides. He thought, I mean, we both agree it was a really well-timed attack. I thought that they kind of gave it away. I thought that the tension between Vos and Kopecky, just staring at each other, and neither one was going to like blink. That is what let Faulkner open that gap, because every second she opens the gap, like she's not going to open that gap quickly, right? If you respond and you catch the slipstream, which I think any of them, with maybe the exception of Vosh, but even then, I think Vosh maybe was like, I'm working too hard to close this gap down. I'm going to let these other two help out.
Right.
Like as long as you don't let the gap open, it's not a big deal. But once the gap opens, it's extremely hard to close because she's very fast. Like the acceleration is not what you need to worry about. It's the distance. And it went from being like not a problem, they're going to catch her, to races over in about 3 seconds.
It was so rapid, yeah. And
it was
honestly,
and it was like 10 seconds after after the attack went, right? Like there was a period of like no big deal, no, it's like practice ball, real. Like it was that sudden flip where you're like, this is silly. This is they're going to catch her, and then it was like, oh wait, no, she's gone.
And I think the moment was when Blankovac decided, okay, I'm done chasing, and then as soon as that happened, Marianne Vos and Lotte Kopecky were not going to take up the chase, because neither one. I mean, if you listen to this podcast, you know this, but neither one of them wants to do the pulling because they assume that means that they're not going to win the sprint, and maybe that is true.
I mean, earlier this spring, getting back to the Passes prologue, Kopecky took Vos to the line like it was no big deal. Like she was going to beat her in a sprint, and she did not beat her in the sprint. Right. And I think that was very, kind of fresh in her mind. Like that was Kopecky's really changing as a rider. Like the past few years of her career have been amazing, but like things have changed in what she can do and what she can't do. And one of the things she's lost is this sprint she used to have. And she's still very fast, but she's not going to beat.
And she has gained an ability to finish second at the Tour de France, which is a big deal. However,
but she's now
today,
this is an area where she is mentally kind of questioning, can I do this?
Yeah.
And she was, I think both she and Vos said, I'm not doing this. I'm not chasing. And the sprint at the end for second and third was extremely close. Like
really close.
Really kind of justified both of their points of view of not chasing, because the margin was so thin that the person who had done more work maybe to chase Faulkner down, like probably would have still beaten Faulkner in the sprint, but like Vosh was very close to Kopecky, who was very close to Vos. Like it wasn't going to be a situation where chasing wouldn't have hurt you severely had the sprint played out.
Yeah. And Faulkner obviously knew that and just did exactly what she should have done at exactly the right moment. And the other thing is, you often see riders, when they put in a big attack, they go really hard for 5 seconds. They turn around, they see someone's on their wheel, and they're like, all right, that was enough. And she didn't do that. Because if she had turned around, she would have seen that Vosh was still there. But she just kept going, and then the elastic snapped. And she went long enough that she won a gold medal. That's what happened. And it was just perfect. It was truly perfect. Yes, Wheel Talk is going to talk more about this, obviously, The reason I'm so jazzed about it, it's, yes, obviously true that she is an American, but the other thing is that this was, to me, such a textbook example of why I love cycling. Honestly, it's what we talk about when we talk about tactics, and when we talk about how it's not just an exercise contest. Because so often, especially the Grand Tours, when across 21 days, the best exercisers kind of do rise to the top. That, in a one-day race, you can get this. If this is marathon, if this is triathlon, swimming, whatever it is, sports that people call endurance sports, Kristen Faulkner doesn't win a gold medal. I think that's fair to say that to Kristen Faulkner. She's just, she's not the exercise contest winner. But she won the race because she attacked at the right moment. She's really good, for sure. She's not a rando, but she attacked at the right moment.
Now, is the team pursuit an exercise contest? Because I believe she is competing in that in a couple more days.
I mean, I would say certainly more so than
and I think
race,
that was sort of how she ended up going to Paris. Am I wrong about this? Did she not make the road race team?
I mean, this is the other crazy story of all of this, is that Taylor Knibb was originally, this is the other crazy USAC BS. That was a big part of this, is that Taylor Knibb was originally supposed to go to Paris for this, in addition to everything else.
For her first elite mass start road race?
Because the way that USAC decided to pick the team included that the time trial champion got to go. And fortunately, Taylor Knibb, to her credit, and I think she deserves a lot of credit for this.
1,000%. I mean,
because it's not her fault that USAC has this ridiculous selection criteria. Yep. She said, "I'm going to give up my spot," and so therefore, Kristen Faulkner is able to race and get a medal.
Not all teamwork is out on the course, right?
Right, exactly. And Taylor Knibb is, by the way, really good at exercising, but Kristen Faulkner, who hasn't always been the best bike handler and has had to improve in some ways.
I feel like we're not allowed to say that anymore. We've said it so many times.
Because it was, But she today won a race in a way that was just so emblematic of everything I love about bike racing.
Yeah.
And why, when I talk about it with people who don't follow it, I like to point out that in some ways it's a lot more like car racing or ball sports even. I mean, there's just so much more to it than exercise. The funny thing is, the best exerciser out on the road, at least for like a long period of time, did win the men's race. But he had to use tactics to do it. Like the guy that is the best time trialist in the world.
At the rightest time.
Right. That's the thing. Because he's the best time trialist in the world, but even that would not have won in the race if he hadn't taken advantage of a perfect moment to put Van der Poel behind him. And same with Kristen Faulkner. She took advantage of the perfect moment to put Marianne Vos, Lada Kopecky behind her. And it was just like, okay, yeah, obviously it's cool that it's an American, but I was so jazzed to see everything I love about bike racing unfolding here in the last couple minutes of the race today. So, we've got Olympic champions, Remco Evenepoel, Kristen Faulkner. Congrats to them and everybody else who medaled. By the way, Marianne Vos getting a medal, 12 years after after the gold medal she won? Really cool. And that would have been a story in and of itself if she'd got the gold medal. So great races. I was just thrilled with the way everything played out at the Olympics. And listen to Wheel Talk for more on the women's race, obviously. Speaking of women's bike racing, Tour de France Femme is right around the corner, which is awesome. Can't wait for that to start, and we will have plenty of coverage at escapecollective.com and in our podcasts. Wheel Talk will have all kinds of coverage, so make sure you check that out. On the men's side, the race that we will be talking about next time you hear from us, one of my favorite one-day races, and one that has been won multiple times by the guy that just won the Olympic gold medal, the San Sebastian. Donostia San Sebastian Classicoa, to be correct with the current naming conventions of the Basque organizers.
I don't suppose we'll see a Tadej Pogacar there, because he's exhausted.
As far as I know, Tadej is not planning to race it. However, lots of big names are. And this is a race that does tend to get big names because they're like, well, I've got the form from the Tour. Might as well stretch it out and do one more big race. One of those riders is Primoz Roglic, by the way. I think Mark Hershey will be there. That would be, he's got the skill set. Can he actually win a race that's not like a 2.1? We'll see. Yeah. Stay tuned this week for that. Head on over to escapecollective.com for our coverage of the Olympics all throughout the week. The track events coming up. And like I said, Abby will have plenty more on the truly, spectacular, really enjoyable, thrilling women's race. If you haven't had a chance to watch either of these races, by the way, go see
Quite
highlights.
good.
They're really entertaining.
Yeah, I believe because they are the Olympics, you will actually be able to see them wherever you are in the world. The coverage may not be what you want, but just turn down the sound to make up your own.
Yeah, good point. All right, that's it for us this week. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a chance to watch, and hope you have a chance to watch all the rest of, not just the bike racing, but, I don't know, is horse dancing still on? Whatever else is going on this week at the Olympics.
The men's 100 meter was very good, and I am not I did race track, I did not sprint, and I will say it was quite a sight to behold.
I did just
race.
trash talk endurance events, but the 4x4 was mixed relay, men's women's, was also fantastic. Spoiler, I won't spoil it, but it was, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. The final 20 seconds are a thrill. All right. We will resume World Tour coverage next week. Until then, I'm Dane Cash, and who are you? What was this?
I'm Cosmo Catalano, and that was the How the Race Was Won podcast.